Evelyn Walker, blinded by prejudice, calls the cops on a black father and his white child at the park, convinced she's stopping a crime. But when the truth unfolds, karma strikes and shatters her life. Can she pick up the pieces and repair the damage caused by her actions? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Evelyn Walker stepped out of her pristine White House, her hair neatly pinned back. The morning sun warmed her face as she began her daily walk through the neighborhood she'd called home for over 40 years. Every lawn was perfectly manicured, every hedge trimmed to perfection. This was her world, and she took great pride in it. As she strolled along the sidewalk, her keen eyes darted from house to house. Mrs. Johnson's roses were in full bloom. The Petersons had finally fixed that loose shutter. Everything was as it should be, orderly and familiar. Evelyn's walk led her to the small park at the center of the neighborhood. She settled onto her favorite bench, the one with the best view of the playground. Sipping her coffee from a thermos, she watched as the morning unfolded around her. That's when she saw them. A tall black man was pushing a little white girl on the swings. The child's laughter rang out across the park, pure and joyful. The man's deep chuckle joined in, creating a harmony that should have been heartwarming. But for Evelyn, it wasn't. A knot formed in her stomach, tight and uncomfortable. She tried to look away, but her eyes kept being drawn back to the pair. "Higher, Daddy, higher!" the little girl squealed with delight. "Daddy?" Evelyn's grip on her thermos tightened. She watched as the man lifted the child off the swing and spun her around. The girl's blonde pigtails flew out as she giggled uncontrollably. Evelyn's heart raced. This wasn't right. It didn't fit into her carefully ordered world. She felt a strong urge to do something, to say something. But what? They weren't doing anything wrong, were they? She took another sip of coffee, hoping it would calm her nerves. It didn't. The uneasy feeling in her gut grew stronger with each passing moment. She tried to reason with herself. They're just playing. It's innocent. But her ingrained prejudices whispered otherwise, feeding her discomfort. Evelyn's heart raced as she watched Darnell and Lily from her perch on the park bench. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The more she observed, the more her suspicions grew. "It just doesn't make sense," she muttered to herself, her fingers tightening around her thermos. How could that little girl be his? She watched as Darnell helped Lily onto the slide, his large hands gentle as he steadied her. The child's laughter echoed across the park, but to Evelyn, it now sounded like a cry for help. What if he's taken her? The thought crept into Evelyn's mind, taking root and growing like a weed. She tried to push it away, but it persisted. Evelyn's hand shook as she reached for her phone in her purse. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen. Should I call? What if I'm wrong? With trembling fingers, she dialed 911. The operator's calm voice answered, "911? What's your emergency?" Evelyn's voice quivered as she spoke. I think I'm witnessing a kidnapping. There's a man with a little girl in Oakwood Park. She doesn't look like she belongs to him. Please, you have to come quickly." She gave the operator a description of Darnell and Lily, her words tumbling out in a rush. As she hung up, guilt and fear warred within her. Had she done the right thing? Minutes ticked by like hours. Evelyn's eyes never left Darnell and Lily as they continued to play, oblivious to the storm they were about to face. Then she heard it, the distant wail of sirens growing louder. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she saw the first police car turn into the park, lights flashing. "Oh Lord," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. The police cars screeched to a halt and officers jumped out, their hands on their holsters. Evelyn watched, her heart pounding, as they approached Darnell and Lily. "Sir, step away from the child," one officer shouted, his voice stern and authoritative. Darnell looked up, confusion etched across his face. "What's going on?" he asked, instinctively pulling Lily closer. "Hands where we can see them," another officer demanded. The commotion drew attention and people began to gather around the edges of the park. Evelyn stood up, her legs shaky but her resolve firm. She felt a surge of pride, convinced she had done the right thing. "It's okay now," she murmured to herself. That poor child will be safe." The situation escalated quickly. Darnell, still bewildered, tried to explain, but the officers weren't listening. They moved in, forcefully separating him from Lily. "No, wait," Darnell pleaded as they pushed him to the ground. Lily began to cry, her small voice rising above the chaos. "What are you doing to my daddy?" The officers paused, exchanging uncertain glances, but they continued their procedure, handcuffing Darnell as he lay face down on the grass. Evelyn watched, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. She felt righteous, thinking she had saved the day. But as she saw the fear in Lily's eyes, a tiny seed of doubt began to grow. Suddenly, Lily broke free from the officer holding her back. She ran towards Darnell, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy! Daddy!" she cried, throwing herself onto his back. The park fell silent. The officers froze, realization dawning on their faces. Evelyn felt the blue drain from her face as the truth hit her like a physical blow. "Oh no," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "What have I done?" The lead officer quickly moved to uncuff Darnell, his face a mask of embarrassment and regret. "Sir, I'm so sorry," he said, helping Darnell to his feet. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding." Darnell stood up, pulling Lily into his arms. The little girl clung to him, her sobs muffled against his shoulder. He looked around at the crowd, his eyes filled with a mix of hurt and disbelief. Evelyn felt her world crumbling around her. The weight of her mistake pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. She watched as the officers apologized profusely to Darnell, their words barely audible over the murmurs of the shocked onlookers. As the tension in the park began to dissipate, a car screeched to a halt at the curb. Jessica, Darnell's wife, leapt out, her eyes wild with fear and anger. She rushed towards her family, her heart pounding in her chest. "Darnell! Lily!" she cried, embracing them both. Then, she turned to face the officers, her voice trembling with fury. "What is going on here? Why are you treating my husband like a criminal?" The lead officer stepped forward, his face etched with regret. "Ma'am, there was a misunderstanding. We received a call about a possible kidnapping." "Kidnapping?" Jessica interrupted, her voice rising. "He's her father. How dare you assume—" She stopped mid-sentence, her gaze landing on Evelyn, who stood frozen nearby. In an instant, Jessica understood what had happened. She marched towards Evelyn, her eyes blazing with righteous anger. Jessica demanded, her voice low and dangerous. "You called the police on my husband for being with his own daughter?" Evelyn opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She felt small and exposed under Jessica's fierce gaze. Jessica continued, her words sharp as knives. "How dare you look at my family and see anything but love? Your prejudice could have gotten my husband hurt or worse." Evelyn's face burned with shame. She wanted to defend herself, to explain her fears, but Jessica's words had cut through her pride, leaving her speechless and humiliated. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, murmuring and shaking their heads. The police officers approached Darnell once more, their apologies falling flat in the face of what had just transpired. "We're truly sorry, sir," the lead officer said, his voice heavy with remorse. "This should never have happened." Darnell nodded silently, holding Lily close as Jessica returned to their side. The family stood together, a united front against the injustice they had just faced. As the police cars drove away and the park emptied, Evelyn was left alone with the crushing weight of her mistake. She watched the family she had wronged walk away, their heads held high despite the ordeal she had put them through. The realization of what she had done, of the harm she could have caused, settled over her like a heavy blanket. Evelyn stumbled back to her house, her legs shaking with each step. The familiar sight of her well-manicured lawn and pristine white fence did nothing to calm the storm raging inside her. As soon as she closed the front door behind her, she leaned against it, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "I was just trying to help," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. I thought I was doing the right thing." But even as the words left her lips, Evelyn knew they rang hollow. The image of Darnell's face, filled with hurt and disbelief, flashed through her mind. And little Lily, crying and clinging to her father. Evelyn's stomach churned with guilt. She made her way to the living room, sinking into her favorite armchair. The room that had always been her sanctuary now felt suffocating. Evelyn's gaze fell on the family photos lining the mantel, smiling faces of her late husband, her son, and herself from happier times. How would they look at her now if they knew what she'd done? As the afternoon wore on, Evelyn's thoughts spiraled deeper into despair. She imagined the news of her actions spreading through the neighborhood like wildfire. The disapproving looks, the whispers behind her back, it would all be unbearable. "What have I done?" she murmured, burying her face in her hands. The isolation she had felt since her husband's passing now seemed to close in around her like a vice. Who would want anything to do with her after this? The sound of a car door slamming outside made Evelyn jump. She hurried to the window, peeking out from behind the curtain. It was just her neighbor across the street, but Evelyn's heart raced. Did they know? Were they already judging her? Evelyn retreated from the window, her shoulders slumped. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. How could she face anyone after what she'd done? How could she make this right? As the shadows lengthened outside, Evelyn remained in her chair, paralyzed by shame and fear. The once comforting silence of her home now felt oppressive, filled with the echoes of her mistake. She had never felt more alone. As the days passed, Evelyn began to notice the ripple effects of her actions spreading through the neighborhood. The once friendly faces that greeted her on her morning walks now averted their eyes, or hurried past with tight-lipped smiles. The change was subtle at first, but it grew more apparent with each passing day. One afternoon, Evelyn forced herself to venture out to the local grocery store. As she pushed her cart down the aisles, the weight of eyes upon her was almost unbearable. She reached for a can of soup, her hand trembling slightly when she overheard hushed voices from the next aisle over. "Did you hear about that woman who called the police on the black dad in the park?" one voice whispered. "Oh, you mean Evelyn Walker," another replied. "I can't believe she'd do such a thing. And to think we used to trust her to watch our house when we were away." Evelyn's cheeks burned with shame. She abandoned her cart and hurried out of the store, leaving behind the whispers and judgmental glances. Back at home, Evelyn sat in her living room, staring at the silent phone. It had been days since anyone had called to chat or invite her to the neighborhood book club. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her once solid reputation had crumbled in a matter of days. As she flipped through her address book, Evelyn's finger hesitated over each name. Who could she call? Who would even want to talk to her now? The names that had once represented friendships and connections now seemed like strangers. Evelyn's gaze drifted to the window, where she could see children playing in the street. She remembered a time when parents would wave to her, trusting her watchful eye. Now, she noticed a mother ushering her child inside as Evelyn's silhouette appeared in the window. The isolation that had been creeping in since her husband's passing now engulfed her completely. Evelyn sank deeper into her chair, the weight of regret pressing down on her chest. She had always prided herself on being a pillar of the community, someone others could rely on. Now, she realized, she had become the person others warned about in hushed tones. As evening fell, Evelyn found herself alone with her thoughts, grappling with the full extent of her actions. She had not only hurt Darnell and his family, but had also alienated herself from the very community she had sought to protect. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow, leaving Evelyn to face the long night ahead with nothing but her regrets for company. The doorbell rang, startling Evelyn from her gloomy thoughts. She shuffled to the door, her slippers scuffing against the hardwood floor. When she opened it, she found her son David standing there, his face a mask of impatience. "Hi, Mom," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I can't stay long. I've got a meeting in an hour." Evelyn's heart sank. She had hoped for a longer visit, maybe even a chance to talk about what had happened in the park. But David was already making his way to the living room, his eyes glued to his phone. "How are you doing, David?" Evelyn asked, following him. "Would you like some tea?" "No time for tea, Mom," David replied, finally looking up from his device. "Listen, I've got some news, and it's not great." Evelyn lowered herself into her favorite armchair, bracing for what was to come. "I know you've been counting on me to help with your expenses," David began, his voice matter-of-fact. But things have been tight at work and I just can't do it anymore. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to figure out how to manage on your own." The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She felt the color drain from her face as the implications sank in. "But David," she stammered, "I don't know if I can keep up with the mortgage payments without your help. I could lose the house." David shrugged, his eyes already drifting back to his phone. "I'm sure you'll figure something out, Mom. Maybe you could get a part-time job or something." Evelyn's mind reeled. A job? At her age? And who would hire her now with her reputation in tatters? The walls of her carefully ordered world seemed to be closing in on her. "David, please," she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to do. Everything's falling apart." But David was already standing up, checking his watch. "I've got to run, Mom. I'll call you later, okay?" As the front door clicked shut behind him, Evelyn sat frozen in her chair. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed to loom over her, a constant reminder of what she stood to lose. She looked around at the familiar walls, the photos of happier times, and felt a wave of despair wash over her. For the first time in years, Evelyn allowed herself to cry, her sobs echoing through the empty house. She felt lost, helpless, and more alone than ever before. Her life, once so orderly and predictable, was unraveling in ways she had never imagined possible. As night fell, Evelyn tossed and turned in her bed, sleep eluding her like a forgotten dream. The events of the past few days played on repeat in her mind, each memory a sharp reminder of her mistakes. She stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of loneliness pressing down on her chest. Unable to find rest, Evelyn slowly got up and shuffled to the window. She pulled back the curtain, hoping the quiet of the night might soothe her troubled thoughts. But what she saw made her heart skip a beat. There, in the yard of the house next door, were Darnell and Lily. The little girl was running around, her laughter carrying through the still air. Darnell chased after her, his face lit up with joy. They were playing a game of tag, their happiness a stark contrast to the gloom that had settled over Evelyn's life. Evelyn's hand trembled as she gripped the curtain. "They're my new neighbors," she whispered to herself, shock coursing through her. She hadn't even noticed when they'd moved in, too caught up in her own world to pay attention to the changes around her. As she watched them play, Evelyn felt a deep ache in her chest. It wasn't just envy at their happiness, but a profound sense of regret. She thought about how she had treated Darnell, how quick she had been to judge him. And now, here he was, living right next door, his joy and love for his daughter on full display. And the laughter drifting through her window seemed to highlight the silence in her own home. Evelyn realized just how empty her life had become. She had pushed people away with her bitterness and judgment, creating a bubble of isolation around herself. Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes as the full weight of her loneliness hit her. She longed for the warmth and connection she saw in Darnell and Lily's relationship. It was a painful reminder of all she had lost, not just her standing in the community, but the human connections that make life worth living. As Darnell scooped Lily up in his arms, both of them giggling, Evelyn felt a shift inside her. The wall of prejudice she had built up over the years began to crumble, replaced by a yearning for the kind of love and joy she saw before her. As the days passed, Evelyn found herself drawn to her window more and more often. Her eyes would seek out Darnell and Jessica's family, watching their daily routines unfold. At first, she told herself it was just curiosity, but deep down she knew it was more than that. One sunny afternoon, Evelyn saw Darnell in the backyard pushing Lily on a swing. The little girl's laughter rang out, clear and joyful. Darnell's face beamed with pride and love as he gently pushed her higher. Evelyn's heart clenched at the sight. "He's such a good father," she whispered to herself, her voice tinged with surprise and a hint of shame. Later that week, Evelyn spotted Jessica tending to their small garden. She watched as Jessica carefully watered the plants, humming softly. When Lily came running out with a handful of dandelions, Jessica's face lit up. She knelt down, accepting the bouquet with exaggerated delight, making Lily giggle. Evelyn's assumptions about this family began to crumble. The love and warmth she witnessed daily stood in stark contrast to the dark picture she had painted in her mind that day at the park. The guilt that had been simmering in her heart started to boil over. One evening, as Evelyn sat in her living room, she heard the family's laughter drifting through her open window. She found herself drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. Peeking through the curtains, she saw them having a picnic in their backyard. Darnell was telling a story, his hands moving animatedly. Jessica and Lily hung on his every word, their faces alight with joy. The scene before her was so full of love and happiness that Evelyn felt her throat tighten. She thought back to that terrible day in the park, to the assumptions she had made and the harm she had caused. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. "I was so wrong," Evelyn murmured, her voice barely audible. "How could I have been so blind?" Yet even as the guilt gnawed at her, Evelyn couldn't bring herself to act. Her pride, though battered, still held her back. The thought of facing Darnell and Jessica, of admitting her mistake, made her stomach churn with anxiety. So she stayed silent, watching from afar, her heart heavy with regret, and her mind filled with the stark reality of the loving family she had so terribly misjudged. As the weeks passed, Evelyn couldn't help but notice how deeply Darnell and Jessica had woven themselves into the fabric of the neighborhood. From her window, she watched as Darnell mowed the lawn of their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Thompson. The old woman's face lit up with gratitude as she offered him a glass of lemonade. On weekends, Jessica could be seen organizing impromptu block parties, her infectious laughter carrying down the street. The aroma of her freshly baked cookies often wafted through the air, making Evelyn's mouth water. She observed as Jessica went door to door, sharing her treats with neighbors who welcomed her with open arms. Lily had become a favorite among the neighborhood children. Her giggles echoed through the streets as she played with her friends, their games spilling from one yard to another. Parents smiled indulgently, charmed by the little girl's infectious joy. Evelyn's heart ached as she witnessed all this. She remembered a time when she, too, had been an active part of the community. Now she felt like an outsider looking in, separated by an invisible wall of her own making. One afternoon, as Evelyn sat on her porch, she saw a group of children excitedly running towards Darnell and Jessica's house. Lily emerged, proudly holding a puppy in her arms. The children's delighted squeals filled the air as they took turns petting the new addition to the neighborhood. Evelyn's eyes misted over as she remembered her own dog, Buddy, who had passed away years ago. She had never gotten another pet, fearing the pain of loss. Now, watching the scene before her, she realized how much joy she had denied herself. The weight of loneliness pressed down on Evelyn's shoulders. She looked around her empty house, the silence deafening. Family photos on the mantel seemed to mock her, reminders of happier times that now felt like a distant dream. As night fell, Evelyn found herself unable to sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The guilt of her actions at the park gnawed at her conscience, while the longing for connection tugged at her heart. "I've made such a mess of things," she whispered into the darkness, her voice thick with unshed tears. "How can I ever make this right?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Evelyn knew she needed to apologize, to make amends somehow, but the thought of facing Darnell and Jessica, of admitting her terrible mistake, filled her with dread. What if they rejected her apology? What if the entire neighborhood turned their backs on her? Yet, as she lay there in the quiet of the night, Evelyn realized that her fear of rejection was a pale shadow compared to the crushing loneliness she felt now. She had to do something, but she didn't know where to start or how to bridge the chasm she had created. As the days wore on, Evelyn's guilt began to take a toll on her health. She found herself feeling dizzy more often, her legs weak and unsteady as she moved around her house. Despite these worrying symptoms, she stubbornly refused to reach out for help. Her pride, the very thing that had gotten her into this mess, now kept her from admitting her vulnerability. One sunny afternoon, Evelyn stood at her kitchen window, a glass of water trembling in her hand. She watched as Darnell chased Lily around their yard, the little girl's squeals of delight carrying through the air. The scene before her made Evelyn's heart ache with a longing she couldn't quite name. What would it be like, she wondered, her voice barely a whisper, to feel that kind of love again? As she observed their playful interaction, Evelyn's mind drifted to happier times in her own life. She remembered picnics in the park with her late husband, his warm smile as he spread out the checkered blanket. She thought of her son, David, when he was Lily's age, his chubby hands reaching for her as she pushed him on the swing. Those memories, once a source of comfort, now served as a stark reminder of how much she had lost. Not just the people she loved, but the warmth and connection she once shared with others. Evelyn realized with a pang of regret how she had allowed bitterness to creep into her heart over the years. She thought back to the community events she used to organize, the neighbors who would drop by for a cup of coffee and a chat. When had she started pushing people away? When had her smile turned into a frown, her welcoming nature into suspicion? Evelyn's reflections were interrupted by another wave of dizziness. She gripped the kitchen counter, her knuckles turning white as she steadied herself. The room spun around her, and for a moment, she feared she might collapse. I should call someone, she thought, her eyes darting to the phone on the wall. But who would she call? David was busy with his own life, and she had alienated most of her neighbors. The thought of admitting her weakness, of asking for help, made her stomach churn with anxiety. As the dizzy spell passed, Evelyn's gaze returned to Darnell and Lily. They were now sitting on the grass, Darnell patiently showing his daughter how to make a daisy chain. The tenderness of the moment brought tears to Evelyn's eyes. She longed for that kind of connection, that simple joy of being with someone who cared. But the gulf between her and the rest of the neighborhood seemed insurmountable. How could she ever bridge that gap, especially after what she had done? On a warm afternoon, Evelyn found herself in her beloved garden, tending to her prized roses. The sun beat down on her back as she knelt in the soft soil, her aging hands gently pruning the delicate flowers. She had always found solace in her garden, but today something felt off. As she reached for another branch, a wave of dizziness washed over her. The world began to spin, and Evelyn felt her knees buckle beneath her. She tried to call out, but her voice came out as a weak whisper. "Help!" she managed to croak, but there was no one around to hear her plea. Evelyn's heart raced as she lay on the ground, surrounded by the flowers she had so lovingly cared for. She tried to push herself up, but her arms felt like lead. Panic set in as she realized how vulnerable she was. Is this how it ends? She thought, a tear rolling down her cheek. Just as hope began to fade, she heard quick footsteps approaching. Through blurry vision, she saw a familiar figure rushing towards her. It was Darnell, concern etched across his face. "Mrs. Walker," he called out, kneeling beside her. "Are you okay? Can you hear me?" Evelyn tried to respond, but words failed her. She could only manage a weak nod. Without hesitation, Darnell pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "Hello? Yes, I need an ambulance," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "My neighbor has collapsed in her garden. She's conscious but unresponsive." As he spoke to the dispatcher, Darnell gently took Evelyn's hand in his. "Help is on the way, Mrs. Walker. Just hold on, okay?" Evelyn stared at Darnell, her mind swirling with confusion. Why was he helping her? After everything she had done, the terrible accusation she had made, why would he show her such kindness? Darnell stayed by her side, his presence a comfort in her moment of distress. He spoke softly, reassuring her that everything would be all right. Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat, overwhelmed by his compassion. As the sound of sirens grew closer, Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to apologize, to thank him, but the words wouldn't come. All she could do was squeeze his hand weakly, hoping he understood the gratitude she couldn't express. The ambulance arrived with a flurry of activity, and the paramedics quickly assessed Evelyn's condition. As they carefully lifted her onto the stretcher, Darnell stood nearby, his face etched with concern. He watched as they loaded her into the ambulance, the flashing lights casting an eerie glow on the quiet neighborhood. "I'll follow you to the hospital," Darnell said to one of the paramedics. "She shouldn't be alone." At the hospital, Evelyn was whisked away for tests and treatment, leaving Darnell in the sterile waiting room. He paced back and forth, his mind racing with worry for the woman who had once caused him so much pain. Hours ticked by, and still he waited. Finally, a doctor approached him. "Are you family?" she asked. Darnell shook his head. No, I'm her neighbor. Is she going to be okay? The doctor nodded. She's stable now. It seems she had a minor stroke, but we caught it early. She'll need some time to recover, but the prognosis is good. Relief washed over Darnell. Just then, he heard a commotion at the entrance. It was David, Evelyn's son, looking frantic and out of breath. "Where's my mother?" David demanded at the nurse's station. Darnell approached him. "David, I'm Darnell, your mother's neighbor. She's okay. The doctor just told me she had a minor stroke, but they caught it in time." David's eyes widened in surprise. You're the one she..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Darnell nodded, a sad smile on his face. "Yeah, that's me. But that doesn't matter now. What matters is your mom's health." David was speechless for a moment, taking in the kindness of the man his mother had wronged so terribly. "Thank you," he finally managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for being there for her when I couldn't be." The two men shook hands, a silent understanding passing between them. When they were allowed to see Evelyn, they found her lying in the hospital bed, looking small and fragile. Her eyes fluttered open as they entered the room. She tried to speak, but her words came out as a weak mumble. "Don't try to talk, Mom," David said gently, taking her hand. "You need to rest." Evelyn's gaze moved from her son to Darnell, and her eyes filled with tears. She had never expected to see him here, showing such compassion after what she had done. The weight of her actions pressed heavily on her heart, and for the first time she felt truly remorseful. As she lay there, memories of that day in the park flooded back. She saw Darnell's face filled with hurt and confusion as the police confronted him. She remembered the pain in little Lily's eyes as she cried for her daddy. The shame Evelyn had felt then was nothing compared to what she felt now, faced with Darnell's undeserved kindness. Evelyn was discharged from the hospital a week later, her body weak and her spirit even weaker. As she entered her home, leaning heavily on her walker, she felt the emptiness of the house more acutely than ever before. The silence seemed to press in on her from all sides. David had helped her settle in, but his visits were brief and infrequent. "I'm sorry, Mom," he'd say, glancing at his watch. "I've got a meeting I can't miss." And just like that, he'd be gone, leaving Evelyn alone with her thoughts. Days passed slowly. Evelyn spent most of her time in bed, too weak to move around much. She'd stare out the window, watching the world go by without her. The neighborhood children played, couples walked their dogs, and families gathered for barbecues. But no one came to visit her. One afternoon, as she gazed out at the sunny day, she saw Darnell in his yard. He was pushing Lily on a swing, both of them laughing. The sight made Evelyn's heart ache with regret and longing. She thought about how Darnell had rushed to her aid when she collapsed, how he had stayed with her at the hospital. His kindness in the face of her cruelty weighed heavily on her conscience. With trembling hands, Evelyn reached for a pen and paper on her bedside table. She began to write, her usually neat handwriting now shaky and uncertain. "Dear Darnell and Jessica, I know these words may come too late, but I need to express how deeply sorry I am for my actions." Tears fell onto the paper as Evelyn poured out her heart. She wrote about her regret, her shame, and her hope for forgiveness. The act of writing brought a sense of relief, as if a burden was slowly lifting from her shoulders. But as she finished the letter, fear crept in. What if they didn't accept her apology? What if they laughed at her efforts or threw the letter away without reading it? The thought made her hands shake even more. Evelyn folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope. She wrote their names on the front, then set it on her nightstand. It sat there, a physical representation of her remorse and hope, waiting for the courage to be delivered. After days of agonizing over her decision, Evelyn finally mustered the courage to send her apology letter. With trembling hands, she placed the envelope in her mailbox, her heart pounding as she closed the lid. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety and anticipation. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across her living room, Evelyn sat in her favorite armchair, lost in thought. She imagined all the ways Darnell and Jessica might react to her letter. Would they be angry? Would they ignore it completely? The uncertainty gnawed at her. Suddenly, a gentle knock on the door startled her from her reverie. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Who could it be at this hour? Using her walker for support, she slowly made her way to the door, her legs feeling weak with each step. As she opened the door, Evelyn's eyes widened in shock. There, on her porch, stood Jessica and little Lily. Jessica held a basket covered with a checkered cloth, and Lily clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Good evening, Mrs. Walker," Jessica said softly, a gentle smile on her face. "We hope we're not disturbing you." Evelyn stood frozen for a moment, her mouth slightly agape. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. After everything that had happened, here they were, standing on her doorstep. "We brought you some homemade cookies," Jessica continued, lifting the basket slightly. "And Lily picked these flowers for you from our garden." Lily stepped forward, offering the small bunch of colorful blooms. "These are for you, Mrs. Walker," she said shyly. Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. The kindness in their gesture was almost too much to bear. I don't know what to say," Evelyn stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Please, won't you come in?" With shaky hands, she opened the door wider, inviting them into her home. As Jessica and Lily stepped inside, Evelyn felt a mix of nervousness and gratitude wash over her. She never expected this response to her letter, and she wasn't sure what would happen next. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. As they settled into Evelyn's living room, an uncomfortable silence filled the air. Jessica sat on the edge of the sofa, her back straight and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Evelyn lowered herself into her armchair, her eyes darting nervously between Jessica and Lily. "Mrs. Walker," Jessica began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion, "I want to thank you for your letter. It meant a lot to us." Evelyn nodded, unable to find her voice just yet. Jessica took a deep breath before continuing. "What happened that day in the park? It hurt us deeply. It wasn't just about Darnell being handcuffed. It was about feeling like we didn't belong, like we weren't safe in our own neighborhood." As Jessica spoke, Evelyn felt the weight of her actions pressing down on her. She listened intently, her heart aching with each word. "Lily was so confused and scared," Jessica went on, her voice cracking slightly. "She couldn't understand why someone would think her daddy was doing something wrong just for playing with her." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jessica nodded, acknowledging Evelyn's words. "It's been hard, Mrs. Walker. We've had to have conversations with Lily that no child should have to have. But we also believe in forgiveness and second chances." As the adults talked, Lily had been quietly coloring something at the coffee table. Now, she stood up and approached Evelyn, holding a piece of paper in her small hands. "Miss Evelyn," Lily said softly, "I made this for you." Evelyn looked down at the child, her heart melting at the innocence in Lily's eyes. She took the handmade card, her hands trembling slightly. On it was a crayon drawing of colorful flowers and a big yellow sun. "Thank you, sweetheart," Evelyn said, her voice choked with emotion. Without warning, Lily stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Evelyn in a tight hug. The old woman stiffened for a moment, then slowly relaxed, gently patting Lily's back. Jessica watched the scene unfold, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. When Lily stepped back, Jessica spoke again, her voice softer now. "Mrs. Walker, Evelyn," she said, "we forgive you. What happened was terrible, but we can see that you're truly sorry, and we believe that people can change and grow." At these words, Evelyn felt as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The guilt that had been crushing her for so long began to ease. She looked at Jessica and Lily, overwhelmed by their capacity for forgiveness. "Thank you," Evelyn said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't deserve your kindness, but I'm so grateful for it. I promise I'll do better. I want to be better." Jessica reached out and patted Evelyn's hand gently. "That's all we can ask for," she said with a small smile. As the days passed, Evelyn found herself looking forward to the visits from Jessica, Darnell, and Lily. They came regularly, bringing warmth and light into her once lonely home. At first, Evelyn felt awkward and unsure, but their kindness slowly chipped away at her defenses. One sunny afternoon, Jessica arrived with a steaming casserole dish. "I hope you like lasagna, Evelyn," she said with a smile as she set it on the kitchen counter. Evelyn's eyes widened. "Oh my, that smells wonderful. You didn't have to go to all this trouble." Jessica waved her hand dismissively. "It's no trouble at all. We enjoy cooking and it's nice to share." As they sat down to eat, Darnell and Lily burst through the door laughing. Lily ran straight to Evelyn, her pigtails bouncing. "Miss Evelyn, look what I made in school today." She thrust a colorful drawing into Evelyn's hands. Evelyn carefully examined the picture, her heart swelling with unexpected joy. "It's beautiful, Lily. You're quite the artist." As they shared the meal, Evelyn found herself relaxing, even laughing at Darnell's jokes. She watched in wonder as this family interacted, their love for each other evident in every gesture and word. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn's perspective began to shift dramatically. She saw the depth of Darnell's devotion to his family, the strength of Jessica's character, and the pure innocence of Lily's heart. The judgments she had held onto for so long crumbled in the face of their genuine kindness. One day, as Lily snuggled up next to her on the couch, Evelyn felt a familiar urge. "Lily, dear," she said softly, "would you like me to teach you how to knit?" Lily's eyes lit up. "Oh yes, please." Evelyn hadn't touched her knitting needles in years, not since her husband passed away. But now, as she guided Lily's small hands, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The rhythmic click of the needles was soothing, and Evelyn found herself smiling more than she had in a long time. As autumn approached, Evelyn surprised herself by starting a new project, a scarf for Lily. She chose soft, colorful yarn that reminded her of Lily's bright personality. Each stitch was filled with care and love, emotions Evelyn had thought long buried. When she presented the finished scarf to Lily, the little girl's eyes widened with delight. "It's so pretty, Miss Evelyn. Thank you." Lily wrapped the scarf around her neck, beaming with pride. Jessica watched the scene with tears in her eyes. "Evelyn, that's so thoughtful of you. Lily will treasure it." Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her chest. "It's been so long since I've had someone to knit for," she admitted softly. "I'd forgotten how good it feels." As she watched Lily twirl in her new scarf, Evelyn realized just how wrong her initial judgments had been. This family, whom she had once viewed with suspicion and fear, had brought more joy into her life than she could have ever imagined. With each visit, each shared meal, each moment spent with Lily, Evelyn felt the ice around her heart melting away, replaced by a growing sense of love and belonging. As the autumn days grew shorter, Evelyn found herself eagerly anticipating Jessica's visits. One crisp afternoon, as they sat in Evelyn's cozy living room, sipping tea and watching the leaves dance outside the window, Evelyn felt a sudden urge to open up. "You know," she began hesitantly, "I never thought I'd feel this close to anyone again." Jessica turned to her, her eyes warm and attentive. "What do you mean, Evelyn?" Evelyn took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her teacup. "After my Harold passed away, I thought that was it for me. I just shut myself off from everyone." Jessica reached out and gently squeezed Evelyn's hand. "That must have been so hard for you." Encouraged by Jessica's kindness, Evelyn continued, "Harold and I, we were high school sweethearts. He was the love of my life." Her eyes misted over with memories. "We had our struggles, but we always faced them together." As Evelyn spoke, she felt a weight lifting from her chest. She shared stories of her life with Harold, their early years of marriage, the joy of raising David, and the pain of losing Harold to cancer. Jessica listened intently, her face a mirror of empathy and understanding. "After Harold died, I pushed everyone away, even David," Evelyn admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "I think that's why he's so distant now. I never gave him a chance to grieve with me." Jessica nodded, her eyes filled with compassion. It's never too late to try and mend things, Evelyn. Have you thought about reaching out to David? Evelyn sighed. I wouldn't know where to start. We've grown so far apart. Maybe you could start small, Jessica suggested gently. A phone call or even a letter, just to let him know you're thinking of him. As they talked, Evelyn felt a warmth spreading through her chest. She realized that this connection with Jessica, this ability to share her thoughts and feelings openly, was something she had been missing for years. It struck her how wrong she had been to judge this family based on their appearance. Here was Jessica, offering her more understanding and support than she had experienced in a long time. You know, Evelyn said softly, I never imagined I'd find this kind of friendship again, especially not. She trailed off, embarrassed. Jessica smiled kindly. Especially not with someone like me? Evelyn nodded, her cheeks flushing. I was so wrong, Jessica. About everything. You and Darnell, you've shown me what true kindness and compassion look like. I can't believe how blind I was. We all have our prejudices, Evelyn, Jessica said gently. What matters is that you're willing to change and grow. That takes real courage. As the afternoon light faded, Evelyn felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. She looked at Jessica with genuine affection, marveling at how this woman, whom she had once viewed with suspicion, had become such an important part of her life. In Jessica's warm smile and kind eyes, Evelyn saw the true meaning of love and acceptance, transcending all the barriers she had once thought insurmountable. As the weeks passed, Darnell and his family continued to visit Evelyn regularly. What began as an act of forgiveness slowly blossomed into a genuine friendship that surprised them both. Evelyn found herself looking forward to their visits, her once lonely home now filled with the warmth of laughter and conversation. One sunny afternoon, Darnell arrived at Evelyn's house to help with some minor repairs. As he worked on fixing a loose floorboard, Evelyn watched him with growing admiration. She couldn't help but notice the care and attention he put into every task, no matter how small. You know, Darnell, Evelyn said softly, I've been meaning to tell you how much I admire the way you care for your family. You're such a devoted father and husband. Darnell looked up, a gentle smile spreading across his face. Thank you, Evelyn. That means a lot to me. Encouraged by his response, Evelyn continued, I see the way you play with Lily, how patient you are with her. It's beautiful to watch. Darnell sat back on his heels, his eyes warm with emotion. I learned that from my own father, he said. He always made time for us kids, no matter how busy he was. As Darnell shared stories from his childhood, Evelyn listened intently. He told her about Sunday dinners with his extended family, where his grandmother would share wisdom passed down through generations. He spoke of his parents' unwavering support, even when times were tough. My folks taught me that family comes first, Darnell explained. They showed me what it means to love unconditionally and to always be there for each other. Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat. That's beautiful, Darnell. I wish I had done a better job with my own son. Darnell reached out and patted her hand gently. It's never too late to start, Evelyn. Love has a way of healing old wounds. As they continued to talk, Evelyn found herself opening up about her own past. She shared memories of her late husband and the struggles they had faced together. Darnell listened with genuine interest, offering words of comfort and understanding. These conversations brought them closer, slowly healing the emotional wounds of the past. Evelyn began to see Darnell not just as a neighbor or a friend, but as a role model, someone whose values and actions she could learn from, even at her age. One morning, David pulled up to his mother's house, his mind preoccupied with work and the quick visit he had planned. As he approached the front door, he heard laughter coming from inside, a sound he hadn't heard in his mother's home for years. Confused, he hesitated before knocking. When Evelyn opened the door, David was taken aback by the smile on her face. Come in, dear, she said warmly. We have company. David stepped into the living room and froze. There, sitting on the couch, was Darnell, the man his mother had wrongly accused months ago. Beside him was a little girl, giggling as she showed Evelyn a colorful drawing. "David, you remember Darnell and his daughter Lily," Evelyn said, her voice filled with a warmth David hadn't heard in years. David nodded, unsure of what to say. He watched as Darnell stood up, extending his hand with a friendly smile. "Good to see you again, David," Darnell said. As David shook Darnell's hand, he couldn't help but notice the easy comfort between his mother and these unexpected guests. The room felt different, lighter, somehow. "Darnell and Lily have been visiting regularly," Evelyn explained, catching David's confused expression. "They've been a tremendous help and, well, they've become dear friends." David sat down, still processing the scene before him. He watched as Lily showed his mother another drawing, Evelyn's eyes lighting up with genuine interest and affection. "You know, David," Evelyn said softly, "Darnell was there for me when I needed help the most. Remember when I collapsed in the garden? He was the one who found me and called the ambulance." David turned to Darnell, surprise evident on his face. I didn't know that was you. Thank you for helping my mother." Darnell shook his head modestly. "It was the right thing to do. And since then, we've all gotten to know each other better. Your mom's become like family to us." As the visit continued, David found himself relaxing. He saw how Darnell's presence seemed to bring out a softer side of his mother, one he hadn't seen in years. Lily's innocent chatter filled the room with joy, and David couldn't help but smile at the child's antics. When it was time for him to leave, David felt a mix of emotions. He was grateful that his mother had found friendship and support, even if it came from an unexpected place. As he hugged Evelyn goodbye, he whispered, "I'm glad you're not alone, Mom. I'm sorry I haven't been around more." Evelyn patted his cheek gently. "It's all right, dear. Things have a way of working out, don't they?" As the days turned into weeks, Evelyn found herself looking forward to Lily's visits more and more. The little girl's bright smile and infectious laughter brought a warmth to Evelyn's home that had been missing for far too long. One sunny afternoon, as Lily burst through the front door with her usual enthusiasm, she shouted, "Other Grandma, I'm here!" The words caught Evelyn off guard, and she felt her heart swell with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Other Grandma?" Evelyn repeated, her voice wavering slightly. Lily nodded vigorously, her curls bouncing. "Yep, Daddy says you're like family now, so you're my other grandma." Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes as she pulled Lily into a tight hug. The love she felt for this child was overwhelming, filling a void she hadn't even realized was there. Over the next few days, Evelyn worked tirelessly on a special project. Her knitting needles clicked rhythmically as she crafted a sweater for Lily, pouring all her affection into every stitch. She chose the softest yarn in Lily's favorite color, a vibrant purple, and added little hearts along the hem. When the sweater was finally finished, Evelyn could hardly contain her excitement. She wrapped it carefully in tissue paper, her hands trembling slightly with anticipation. The next time Lily visited, Evelyn presented her with the gift. "I made this just for you, sweetheart," she said, her voice filled with tenderness. Lily's eyes widened as she tore open the package. When she saw the sweater, she let out a squeal of delight that echoed through the house. "It's so pretty," she exclaimed, immediately pulling it over her head. The joy on Lily's face was infectious. Evelyn found herself laughing along with the little girl as she twirled around the living room, showing off her new sweater. "Thank you, other Grandma," Lily said, throwing her arms around Evelyn's waist. "I love it so much." As Evelyn held Lily close, she felt a sense of belonging wash over her. This child, with her boundless love and acceptance, had brought new life into Evelyn's world. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt truly loved and valued. The warmth of family and connection filled Evelyn's heart, chasing away the loneliness that had been her constant companion for so long. In Lily's innocent embrace, Evelyn found a love she thought she'd never experience again. As the days passed, Evelyn's bond with Jessica, Darnell, and Lily continued to grow stronger. The family's presence in her life brought not only emotional support, but also practical help that Evelyn desperately needed. One evening, as they shared a meal together in Evelyn's cozy dining room, Jessica noticed the stack of bills on the nearby desk. "Evelyn," she said gently, "is everything okay with your finances?" Evelyn's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but she found herself opening up. "To be honest, I've been struggling a bit lately," she admitted. Jessica and Darnell exchanged a glance. "We'd love to help if you'd let us," Darnell offered. Over the next few weeks, Jessica and Darnell worked with Evelyn to create a budget and find ways to cut costs. They helped her negotiate better rates on her utilities and showed her how to shop more efficiently for groceries. Darnell even started bringing extra groceries when he visited. "I got a great deal on these," he'd say with a wink, setting down bags of fresh produce and pantry staples on Evelyn's kitchen counter. The kindness and support overwhelmed Evelyn. She found herself looking forward to their shared meals, which became a regular occurrence. The laughter and warmth that filled her home during these times made her realize how lonely she had been before. One Saturday afternoon, as Darnell was helping Evelyn organize her garage, David unexpectedly dropped by. He was surprised to see Darnell there, covered in dust, but smiling as he worked alongside his mother. "David!" Evelyn exclaimed, her face lighting up. "What a nice surprise!" David looked around, taking in the scene. "Mom, I didn't realize you needed so much help," he said, a hint of guilt in his voice. Evelyn patted his arm. "Oh, it's all right, dear. Darnell and his family have been wonderful." As they talked, David began to see how much his mother had changed. She seemed happier, more energetic. He realized with a pang that he had been too caught up in his own life to notice her struggles. "Mom," David said softly, "I'm sorry I haven't been around much. I'd like to change that, if you'll let me." Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes as she hugged her son. "I'd like that very much," she whispered. From that day on, David made a conscious effort to spend more time with his mother. He joined the family dinners, pitched in with household chores, and even started learning about budgeting from Jessica and Darnell. As Evelyn watched her son laughing with Darnell over a shared joke, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. The love and support surrounding her had not only helped stabilize her finances, but had also brought her family closer together in ways she never could have imagined. As the weeks passed, Evelyn's once quiet home transformed into a hub of warmth and laughter. Jessica, Darnell, and little Lily became frequent visitors, filling the rooms with joy and companionship. The sound of Lily's giggles echoed through the hallways, breathing new life into the old house. One sunny afternoon, they all gathered around Evelyn's kitchen table. The aroma of freshly baked cookies wafted through the air as Jessica pulled a tray from the oven. Darnell was busy helping Evelyn sort through her mail, while Lily colored happily in her sketchbook. As Evelyn looked around at the scene before her, she felt a lump form in her throat. It was hard to believe how much had changed since that fateful day in the park. The memory of her mistake still stung, but it was overshadowed by the incredible love and forgiveness she had received. "You know," Evelyn began, her voice soft with emotion, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm almost grateful for what happened that day." Jessica and Darnell looked up, surprised by her words. "I mean, I'm not proud of what I did," Evelyn continued, her eyes misting over. "But if it hadn't happened, I might never have known the incredible people you are. You've changed my life in ways I can't even begin to express." Darnell reached out and squeezed Evelyn's hand. "We're just glad we got to know the real you, Evelyn," he said with a warm smile. Jessica nodded in agreement. "You've become part of our family now. We couldn't imagine our lives without you." Evelyn felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know what I did to deserve such kindness, but I'm so grateful for all of you." At that moment, Lily looked up from her coloring book. Seeing Evelyn's teary eyes, she jumped up from her chair and rushed over, wrapping her small arms around Evelyn's waist. "Don't cry, Grandma Evelyn," Lily said, her voice full of concern. "We love you." Evelyn hugged Lily back, her heart overflowing with emotion. The unconditional love of this child, who had every reason to fear her, was almost more than she could bear. As they all sat there embraced in the warmth of forgiveness and newfound family, Evelyn realized that her life had been forever changed. The incident in the park, which had once filled her with shame, had become the catalyst for the most beautiful transformation of her life. As the warm afternoon sun bathed Evelyn's garden in a golden glow, she sat in her favorite wicker chair, watching Lily chase butterflies among the blooming flowers. The little girl's laughter filled the air, a sound that had become as familiar and cherished as the chirping of birds in Evelyn's once quiet backyard. From the open kitchen window, the savory aroma of Darnell's famous pot roast wafted out, mingling with the sweet scent of Jessica's apple pie. The clinking of pots and pans and the soft murmur of their voices created a comforting backdrop to the scene before her. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, letting the peacefulness of the moment wash over her. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago her house had been a lonely, silent place. Now it buzzed with life and love, filled with the warmth of her newfound family. As she opened her eyes, Evelyn caught sight of the small patch of forget-me-nots she had planted with Lily last week. The delicate blue flowers seemed to nod in the gentle breeze, reminding her of how far she had come. Gone was the bitterness that had once clouded her heart, replaced by a deep sense of gratitude and joy. "Grandma Evelyn, look!" Lily's excited voice pulled her from her thoughts. The little girl was holding up a colorful butterfly perched on her finger, her eyes wide with wonder. Evelyn leaned forward, her face lighting up with a smile. "Oh my, isn't that beautiful, sweetheart?" she said, her voice filled with genuine delight. As Lily gently released the butterfly, Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her chest. The love she felt for this child, for Darnell and Jessica, was unlike anything she had experienced before. It was a love born out of forgiveness, understanding, and second chances. She thought back to that day in the park, the day that had changed everything. What had started as her greatest mistake had somehow become the catalyst for the most beautiful transformation of her life. The journey hadn't been easy, but as Evelyn sat there surrounded by the sights and sounds of her new family, she knew it had been worth every step. A contentment unlike any she had known before settled over her. Evelyn smiled, watching Lily skip back to the flower beds, her heart full of peace and gratitude for the unexpected gift of connection she had been given. If you enjoyed the story of Evelyn, Darnell, Jessica, and Lily, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.